What if I told you that some of the biggest moments in wrestling history are also some of its most embarrassing? That behind the glitz, the gold, and the roaring crowds, there are championship reigns so baffling, so poorly executed, that fans are still scratching their heads years later. If you came here to see which champions truly didn't deserve the spotlight, or at least didn't live up to it, you're in the right place. Because today, we're diving deep into the most questionable world title reigns ever. And trust me, some of these will make you wonder how they even made it past the planning stage. In professional wrestling, the World Championship is supposed to mean everything. It represents the very best, a performer who can lead a company, deliver unforgettable matches, and make fans believe they are watching the absolute peak of the sport. But history hasn't always been kind to that idea. Sometimes, decisions get made for shock value, business experiments, or short-term storytelling, and the result is a champion that leaves more confusion than celebration. Starting off, there was a man who looked like he had been built in a laboratory to dominate wrestling. Towering, massive, and intimidating beyond belief, he entered the scene with an aura that instantly grabbed attention. The idea was simple: present him as an unstoppable monster, and at first glance, it made sense. His presence alone could make any opponent look vulnerable. But wrestling is more than just appearance. Once the bell rang, the cracks began to show. His movement was slow, his offense limited, and his matches often lacked the energy needed to keep fans invested. Against faster, more dynamic opponents, the contrast became even more obvious. Instead of elevating the action, his style dragged it down. Still, the company pushed forward, seeing potential beyond the ring, especially in expanding into new markets. When he eventually captured the world title after it was vacated, it felt less like a triumphant moment and more like a forced decision. The reign that followed didn't deliver anything memorable. Matches felt clunky, storylines lacked excitement, and the overall presentation struggled to convince fans that this was the right choice. Even specialty matches designed to create spectacle ended up highlighting the limitations rather than hiding them. In the end, the reign became more of a reminder that size alone isn't enough to carry the biggest prize in wrestling. Then there was another champion who, on paper, seemed like the perfect blueprint. Athletic, strong, and backed by a legitimate wrestling background, he checked all the boxes that typically lead to success. The company clearly saw potential and gave him the tools to rise, including a major opportunity that almost guarantees a championship run. When that opportunity was finally cashed in, it should have been the beginning of something special. Instead, it quickly became clear that something was missing. Despite his physical abilities, he struggled to connect with the audience. His promos lacked intensity, his character felt underdeveloped, and there was no emotional hook to draw fans in. As the days passed, the title reign drifted by without much impact. It wasn't a disaster in the traditional sense, there were no major controversies or shocking missteps, but it suffered from something arguably worse: forgettability. A world champion is supposed to leave a mark, to create moments that stick with fans long after the reign ends. In this case, the memory faded almost as quickly as it began. Looking further back in history, there was a champion whose reign was never really meant to matter. He stepped into the spotlight during a time when the company needed a temporary solution, someone to hold the title just long enough to transition it back to a bigger star. And that's exactly what happened. His victory came as a surprise, but it didn't carry the weight of a new era. Instead, it felt like a brief pause in a much larger story. Within days, the title changed hands again, and the spotlight moved on. It wasn't about his ability or his dedication. He was a respected veteran, but the circumstances of his reign ensured that it would always be remembered as a stepping stone rather than a destination. Then there's one of the most bizarre cases in wrestling history. A legend who absolutely deserved to be champion, but was never given a proper chance to prove it. After years of dominance and global recognition, he finally reached the top. But instead of a meaningful reign, his time as champion lasted less than 2 minutes. The moment itself was shocking, designed to catch viewers off guard and create buzz. But almost immediately, the title was handed off as part of a storyline twist, cutting the reign short before it could even begin. What should have been a defining chapter in his legacy turned into a footnote. It wasn't a reflection of his greatness, it was a reflection of how the moment was handled. And then things take a turn into truly controversial territory. At one point, a major wrestling company decided to put its world championship on someone who wasn't even a wrestler. An actor, brought in as part of a promotional effort, suddenly found himself holding the most prestigious title in the company. But putting the world title on him crossed a line. It shifted the focus away from the wrestlers and onto a storyline twist that didn't offer much in return. The victory itself came under chaotic circumstances, and just as quickly as it happened, the title was vacated. There was no lasting impact, no meaningful progression, just a moment designed to shock. The same era also saw the women's division treated in ways that, looking back, feel deeply flawed. At one point, a manager disguised in a comedic gimmick won the women's championship. The entire scenario was played for laughs, from the costume to the match stipulation. While it may have entertained some viewers in the moment, it did little to respect the division or its athletes. The title became a punchline, and the reign itself highlighted how little importance was placed on building meaningful competition for female wrestlers at the time. Similarly, another champion from that division gained the title through gimmick matches that focused more on spectacle than skill. Instead of showcasing athleticism or storytelling, the emphasis was on visual appeal and shock value. While it fit the chaotic tone of the era, it didn't help the championship gain credibility. It wasn't until later, with more well-rounded performers, that the division began to recover its reputation. Moving into another era, there was a tough, hard-hitting competitor who managed to achieve what many thought impossible, defeating one of the biggest stars in wrestling to win the world title. It was a genuine surprise, a moment that caught fans off guard. But even as it happened, there was a sense that it wouldn't last. The entire storyline was built around the idea of a comeback, a redemption arc for the previous champion, and sure enough, the title was reclaimed not long after. The reign served its purpose in the story, but it didn't elevate the new champion to a lasting position at the top. And finally, perhaps the most infamous case of all, a writer, someone working behind the scenes, stepping into the ring and winning the world championship. It wasn't just unexpected, it felt like a complete disregard for everything the title was supposed to represent. The victory came through convoluted circumstances, involving outside interference and unusual match rules. And while it may have achieved the goal of shocking the audience, it also damaged the credibility of the championship. When a non-wrestler can win the top prize, it raises questions about what that prize really means. The reign didn't last long, but the impact lingered. It became a symbol of a company in decline, a moment where the line between creativity and chaos was completely blurred. Looking back at all of these reigns, a pattern begins to emerge. It's not always about the individuals themselves. In many cases, the problem lies in the decisions behind the scenes, the desire for shock over substance, for short-term buzz over long-term storytelling. The World Championship is more than just a prop, it's a symbol. And when it's treated lightly, fans notice. So the next time you see a champion standing tall with the gold, remember what it's supposed to represent. Because for every legendary reign that defines an era, there are others that remind us how easily things can go wrong. And sometimes, those missteps are just as unforgettable as the greatest victories.